Hi everybody and welcome to Observing with Webb for May of 2016. May is going to be a slightly atypical May for this year. Typically May is not all that exciting, nothing happening annually, but this year we've got two things that you can see with a telescope. So if you have a buddy that's got a telescope, find them and reserve them for let's see, May 9th and, well, pretty much the last week of May, somewhere around there. Because we have an opposition of Mars at the end of May. That's when it'll be big. And we also have the Mercury transit going on in the beginning on the 9th of May. So we're going to take a look at those. We also have 3 planets that you can see throughout the night, even better with the telescope. And, yeah. Put some warmer nights in there, and we've got some good stargazing going on for May. So I'm going to start off talking about the planets that you can see. Then I'll talk about the events, the opposition and the transit. And then I'll talk about constellations real quick. So let's go ahead and let's talk about the planets. Now I have this set up for a average night, May 15th. Okay, and as you can see, I have it for sunset at 8:14, and you see that I have Jupiter up here in Leo. In fact, we can kind of zoom in. If you're looking for Jupiter, if you can find Leo, you're set, because all you have to do is look for the bright point below it. Just so happens that on the 14th and the 15th, the moon is actually going to be right nearby, but that's for later, so I'll go a little bit later. But anyway, so you see Jupiter up in the sky. It's up in the south around sunset. And then throughout the night, it's going to set. Now, Jupiter is going to set around 2 or 3 a.m. over there in the west. I would highly suggest taking out a telescope or even just a set of binoculars so that you can zoom in and see something kind of like this. Oh, sorry. There we go. Something like that. The labels are in the way. But you can actually see the belt of Jupiter, the 2 belts, and you can see some of the 4 Galilean moons that are constantly moving around it. If you have an even bigger telescope, you can make it look even bigger than that. Okay? So that's Jupiter. You can see that every night, starting in the south around sunset and ending up in the west. The other 2 planets that you can see, and they're also 2 planets worth getting a telescope out for, are going to be Mars and Saturn. And as you can see, I have this set for about 9:40, close to 10 p.m. By 10 p.m., both of them are going to be rising up in the southeast. And they're going to be visible from then all the way into the morning. So you just look southeast after 10 p.m., and you'll see Mars up here, Saturn down here, and this is the bright star Antares, which is the brightest star in Scorpius. Now, it's also red. Mars is also red, and Saturn is sort of cream colored. But anyway, throughout the month, they actually make a nice little triangle that sort of changes its shape throughout the month. But it's a nice triangle to take a look at. If you're going to look for this, I would highly suggest getting a sky map. Skymaps.com has a good one that actually shows the stars of Scorpius so that you can tell which are Mars and Saturn, because they're not on the star chart. But anyway, let me zoom out. Let me make this go to about midnight so that Scorpius is pretty high up. Actually, let me go a little bit later. There's Scorpius, and there's Mars and Saturn. Now, take a look and see what happens throughout the month. I'm going to start May 1st, okay? And you see the triangle that they make, and then day after day, you know what? Let me center on Antares there, okay? Then what you notice is day after day, Mars sort of moves away from the 2, and Saturn moves a little closer to Antares. But they still keep a nice triangle there. Mars kind of goes through the head of the Scorpion, if you will. All right. Yeah, so anyway, every night they're going to rise about 10 p.m., and they're going to move low in the south until finally by morning they're going to be off in the southwest, but not setting yet. Okay? So yeah, you've got Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter to look at. If you take a telescope to these guys, Saturn looks really great because you can see the what Galileo called ears of Saturn, which are just the rings that we know now, and you can actually see Mars, Mars is a lot bigger than it usually is, okay, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But you might be able to get, with a really good telescope, a view something like that. With a low power telescope, it's like that, but you can still see some of the surface features. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. You might notice that I'm leaving two planets out that you can see with your naked eye, and that would be Mercury and Venus. Mercury is actually passing, if my head's the sun and you are the Earth, passing right in between. Okay, that's why we can't really see it, because the sun's too bright. Venus, on the other hand, is actually making a lap around the back of the sun, so we're not able to see that right now either. So those will probably become visible in June or July. But anyway, that's it for the planets. Jupiter in the beginning of the night, and Saturn and Mars for most of the night. Let's talk about some events. Let's go and start with May 6th, because that's the first real event, and that is a new moon. That's the darkest skies. That's when you can't see the moon at all. So really, I'm not showing you anything on this picture right now. But what's going to happen is, over the next couple of nights, you'll see the moon rising up over here. Okay, you'll see it rising up, and it's getting a little bit bigger and a little bit thicker. It's a nice crescent moon. Okay? But the 9th is when something very interesting happens. In fact, I'm going to go to, let's start at 7:12. 7:12 a.m. on May 9th. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the sun. I'm going to, let's go into the sun, and let's center it. And let's zoom in. Oh, look, there's Mercury. So Mercury's coming around in its orbit. It's faster than us. So it's coming around in its orbit between us, the Earth, and the sun. If I'm the sun, it's coming around this way. If my head's the sun, it's coming around this way, and then it's passing right in between. It's going to take about 7.5 hours to transit that sun. But let's take a look. Okay, I'm going to make the day go by, and you notice that Mercury is just a small little dot. There are some clouds in the simulation here, but you see it's just a small little dot that's transiting across the sun, and it is basically making a line that cuts off about 1/3 of the sun, if it could actually cut. And let me keep this going. And then about 7.5 hours later, at about 2:42 p.m., this is a great school day event, Mercury stops. Well, it doesn't stop. It continues going, but it's no longer in front of the sun. The times will vary a little bit based on where you live, even within the time zone a little bit. But according to my sources right now, for somewhere in Lancaster, at about 7:12 a.m. is when it starts, and midpoint is 10:58, and it ends at 2:42 p.m. Now, don't go looking at this with your naked eye. That is not a good idea. You need to either get, now, you probably won't see it, but if you can find some solar filter glasses, like the little paper ones that they sell at the local, what do we call it, planetarium, or you could find some welder's glasses, you might be able to see it, but Mercury is really small, as you can tell, in this picture. It's small. It's even smaller than a sunspot, so might not be able to see it. So you kind of need a telescope with a solar filter. Solar filter is just a little shiny metal ring that goes on top of the front of the telescope, blocks out most of the light and lets only a little bit in, so then you can actually look at the sun through a telescope. I would look those up based on your telescope model and what you need to do, but I'll let you find that. There are actually some you can buy. I've made one for a camera where you actually sell the film, not the camera film, but sell like a film, and then you cut it out to the shape of your camera, and then I just made some sort of like paper mount and just put it in front of the camera lens, and that makes my camera a solar camera. So there are ways around it. You can figure it out, but find a buddy with a telescope, or even better, a solar telescope, which use specific filters to draw out lots of really cool details. But make sure you know what you're doing. Look it up. That would be a whole nother podcast or a whole nother video. Okay? All right. So, Oh, there's even a cool one where you can use your low power eyepiece in the telescope and have a piece of paper back behind the eyepiece, and it'll actually project an image of the sun. That's what I'm going to do for my students on Monday. Anyway, so let's zoom back out. Let's go to sunset on May 9th. Let's zoom back out. Okay. And let's see, sunset May 9th. You see the moon's over here. Okay. And what's going to happen is the moon is going to keep getting thicker and thicker and higher in the sky until May 13th. May 13th, you've got the first quarter moon. As you can see, the right half of it is lit up, and you can see that up until about 11 o'clock or midnight. Then you will also notice that the moon is actually close to Jupiter. And what you're going to find is on May 14th, okay? On May 14th, the moon is actually going to be pretty close to Jupiter, okay? In fact, about 4 degrees apart. So if you look at it at night, it's going to be about this close. It's a waxing gibbous moon, and yeah, if you have trouble finding Jupiter, that's the day to go out and find it. Okay? Then the moon is going to get thicker and thicker and closer to full until the 21st is the full moon. Okay, that's when right around sunset the moon is rising up in the east as the sun is setting in the west. You can see it the entire night. It makes a nice, beautiful light to walk around the woods, I guess. They don't have full leaves yet, so maybe you can see yourself. But anyway, 21st is when Mars comes to opposition and closest approach. I'm not going to go into the difference between opposition and closest approach. Just know that starting about May 14th and going till the end of the month, maybe even into June, are the best times to see Mars. Why? Because if my head's the sun and this is Earth and this is Mars, I don't know if you can see it. Typically, Earth is in a different spot and is very far away from Mars. Okay, but we're both going around in orbit. So what happens is every now and then, Earth catches up and laps Mars, and they're actually pretty close, much closer than they are when they're that far apart. About every 2.5 years, that happens where we actually lap Mars, and that's when Mars goes into retrograde motion. Don't read into any of the astrology stuff with that. All it means is we're lapping Mars, and it looks like Mars is moving the opposite direction among the constellations compared to normal. But anyway, this is when Mars is going to be biggest. Okay, it's not going to be as big as a full moon. Don't fall for that. That's a hoax. Just Google Mars hoax and you'll see it. It'll never do that. That would be very bad if it did. But anyway, this is the biggest it's going to be in the past 11 years. It'll be about as big as Saturn is in a telescope. Not as big as Jupiter, but as big as Saturn. And the thing is that most of the rest of the time it's much, much smaller. So let me go ahead and zoom in on Mars. So let me center. Let me show you what I mean here. Typically, if I were to go out and observe Mars, I would see that, just a red dot. Most of the year, most of the 2 years, a red dot. But if coming up in the end of May, if I zoom in, I can probably get something closer to that, where I can actually make out some surface features. Can you see there's like some dark spots there? And there are maps of Mars' surface. Now I'm going to zoom in a lot further. You can actually see a polar cap there. You might catch that as well. You probably won't see these individual craters, but because you'll be looking at it like this. But you can make that stuff out. And I'm very excited to take a look at it. So that's the Mars opposition and closest approach. And it's going to be up here in front of the Scorpion's head when that happens. Yeah, there's plenty of good information out there. If you go to my Podbean site, you can find more there as well. And then, oh, here we go. From the 21st to the, let's see, 21st, yeah, pretty much the 21st. I mess it up. I got to make a change in my notes. On the 21st, you get a nice close encounter with the Moon, Mars, Saturn, and Antares. Nice quadrangle right there. 4 sides, almost a good rectangle there. And that's going on May 21st. So just look out after 10 p.m. Look to the east, and you'll find all of them sort of hanging out together there. Let's zoom back out, and all right, that's 21st, 22nd. We'll say 21st to 22nd. Okay. Yeah, and then really the only thing that happens, let me fast forward time, is each day the moon gets, now that it's full, it gets a little less full, more gibbous, and it gets thinner and thinner until the very last phase of this month is the last quarter moon, where the left half is lit up, and you can only see it from about midnight and into the morning. Okay. Yeah, that's it for the events. Interesting stuff going on. I hope you get out to see the transit. It's during the day, so you might have to go out on your lunch break with a buddy that has a telescope. But it's out there. All right. One last thing. Let's talk about some constellations that we can see. So let me go back to May 15th. It's a nice average night. Let me zoom out. And let me go to sunset. I'm going to go to about, let's go when it's real dark, about 10 o'clock. And let's look at the zenith, the point perfectly straight above you. I don't normally recommend it because it's easy to get lost and tilted when you're looking straight up. But if you do look straight up, you can see the Big Dipper almost perfectly straight above you, okay, right up here. Now the cool thing about that is you can now see some of the spring constellations. If you can find the Big Dipper here, okay, which is 7 very bright stars. It's one of the easiest things to find. Technically the whole constellation is Ursa Major, all of these leg stars too, but the Big Dipper is the asterism that we can see. Follow this arc that those stars make. Follow the arc to the bright star Arcturus. Now, Arcturus is the brightest star in the Shepherd constellation known as Bootes, which sometimes look like it looks like a kite, looks like an ice cream cone, depending on who you ask. But the cool part about this is once you follow the arc to Arcturus, you can speed on to Spica, which is the brightest star in Virgo. Virgo's a dimmer constellation. I think she looks more like a mermaid, but that comes from a Dickinson grad. And yeah, it's neat to find out there. Jupiter's over here with Leo. Leo's pretty easy to find. But yeah, those are some spring constellations. Also, if you take a look, if you can find Bootes, you can also find some other spring constellations. Oop, let me change that around. You can find Corona Borealis. This line doesn't do it justice. It's a nice little cup in the sky. And Hercules is over here, and if you have a telescope, you can zoom in on the Hercules cluster. It's a beautiful star cluster out there in the sky. And yeah, I think that's about it. The only other thing I would mention is if you're out there at night, especially going into summer, you start getting Scorpius and Sagittarius, which are great constellations to find. But you got to get out kind of late to see those guys. So anyway, I hope that you guys all have very clear, dark skies for the month of May.